So we are going to go into functions. We're going to review with something that you guys already know, and then we're going to take it into the Algebra 2. So it's going to layer a little bit. So this is just, you've got like 3 different functions, f, g, and h. And so whatever variable you have is the one that you use, and you just substitute. So back in Algebra 1, I know you guys did this. So f of 2, so we use the f function, and we put a 2 wherever the x is. So f of 2 is just 2 plus 3, which will give you the number 5. And that's your answer. All right. So then the next one, well, I'm going to scroll that in a second so you can see it a little bit better. H of negative 1, that means I'm going to use the h function, but instead of x, I'm going to put negative 1 right there. So 2x minus 8, but I'm going to put negative 1 in there. So negative 2 minus 8 is negative 10. And that's our answer for this one. And then I'm going to rewrite the g. You don't have to. I'm just doing it so you can see it. I know there's a glare right there. So it says g of 3. So I'm going to use the g function. I'm going to use the g function, and that's x squared minus 1. And a lot of times I like to take out the x and put in parentheses so that I'm careful. So I'm going to put the 3 in place of that x. You can use your calculator. That's 9 minus 1, which is 8. All right, so you did that back in Algebra 1 where you put in the x and you got out the value. So it's just input and output, x's and y's a lot of times, something like that. So then we have zeros. Zeros, and we know what zeros are. They're where we cross the x-axis. If you plug the value into the equation, you get a 0. It equals 0. And remember when we did the factoring and the solving and that kinds of stuff, you looked for y is 0. The same thing. Where is the function 0? Where will it equal that 0? Okay. So this is different. This says that we circle any values that are zeros. So we're going to put in each of these numbers, and if we get out a 0, then that means that it is a 0 of that function. So if I put in a 0 right here, I will get, I'm just going to write it above it so we can, well, I guess, yeah, that way I've got some room. 2 times 0 minus 2 to the 3rd power. So I put a 0 in for x right there. So that's negative 2 to the 3rd power is negative 8. Times 2 is negative 16. So that is what it's equal to. I know that's a little bit hard to see, but that works. Okay. The next one says negative 1. So I'm going to say 2 times negative 1 minus 2 to the 3rd power. So that is, let me put an equals there instead. So that is negative 3 to the 3rd power is negative 27 times 2 is negative 54. All right, so here's that answer. Here is this answer. Okay, if you want to use a graphing calculator or use your calculator for different parts, that's fine. So if I put in a 1 right here, I get 2 times 1 minus 2 to the 3rd. And that equals negative 1 to the 3rd is negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. And then the last one I will do in red. I don't know if that, okay, I just want to make sure you can see it. So I put in a 2 right here. 2 times 2 minus 2 to the 3rd. 2 minus 2 is 0. 0 to the 3rd is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. Okay? And then it says, circle any values that are 0. So this one is a 0 because we got out a 0. Okay? It would actually cross the x-axis at the value 2 because it is a 0. We got 0. Okay? So that does relate a little bit to our polynomials. So then this is the same idea. I'll go ahead and I'll do the work above so that we can see it. So I put in a negative 1 right here. I get the square root of negative 1 minus 1. So that's the square root of negative 2, and we know that negative means I. So this answer is I root 2. Okay, so it just builds on stuff you already know. You know about I, but you can't square root 2, so you just leave it. All right, so I put in a 1 right here. It's the square root of 1 minus 1, which is the square root of 0, which is a 0. And so since we got out a 0, that means that this number 1 is a 0, because it gives us a 0 as a result. All right, the next one is a 2, so I'm going to put a 2 right there. The square root of 2 minus 1 is the square root of 1. So that is the number 1. Let me get that little 1. Okay, so that just gets you, you put in a 2, you get out a 1. And then the last one, I don't know if green, oh, just kidding, that is the last one. Okay, so this is just practicing putting in values. These functions are a little bit harder, but you put in values, you get outputs. Those are those final outputs, okay? And if any of those outputs are 0, then they are zeros. And those x values that we put in are called zeros. That's where we will cross the x-axis like we did with other polynomials, okay? All right, so then let's keep going with the page. All right. So, we also have domain and range, which we've done in the past, where domain stands for your x values and range stands for your y values. So you just put in different x values and you get out different y values, which again, I know you've done back in Algebra 1. So that means that we put x in 3 times. We put an x in for that one, we put this in for x, then we go back and put that in for x, and we go back and we put that in for x. So when I do that, and again, I like to write it with parentheses, x squared plus 3, let me write it a little bit larger so you can see, x squared plus 3, and then another x squared plus 3, and then another x squared plus 3. So I've got this 3 times because I'm going to put in those 3 numbers. So I'm going to put negative 2 in, I'm going to put 0 in, and I'm going to put positive 2 in. And when I do that, then I'll get an output. So negative 2 squared with parentheses is 4. 4 plus 3 is 7. 0 squared plus 3 is just 3. 2 squared is 4 again. 4 plus 3 is 7. So since those repeat, you don't have to list both of them. It's just 7 and 3. Because it stood for, that 7 stands for both outputs. You only have to list range values once, okay? So then we do the same thing for the next function. We put in those 3 x's, x, x, and x, okay? And we will get out maybe 3 values. So the absolute value of 3 times x minus 1, the absolute value of 3 times x minus 1, and the absolute value of 3 times x minus 1. Again, I really like to just take out the x, put in parentheses, and then go back. I think it makes it nice and simple, and that's actually what we're going to do when we get to this next part. So I put in a negative 1, I put in a 3, and I put in a 7. So negative 3 minus 1, is negative 4. And the absolute value of that is a positive 4. 9 minus 1 is 8. And the absolute value of 8 is just 8. And then this is 21 minus 1 is 20. The absolute value of that is 20. So our range is 4, 8, and 20. None of those repeated, so it is those values, okay? So you don't have to do any repetition stuff.